Hey, so I'm going to show one more thing today, which is how to control the volumes of the sounds that get generated, using the volume that bonk is sensing from your claps. So the idea being, if you clap quietly, the sound that's being generated will play quietly. If you clap loudly, the sound that will play plays really loudly. So you'll see that this is like a pretty quick and dirty method, but it works more or less, and it's quite fun. So hopefully it'll get you started. Anyway, so as normal, I'm going to start a new patch, and I'm going to save it immediately where I've been saving all my stuff. So we'll call this volume control. There we go. So that way when I load up my sound files, I know where they're going to be. So where it's all going to be. So I'll start by making my bonk object and by making my audio input. And then just like normal, I'll make my threshold controller. If you've been following along with me on all these, then this should start getting pretty fast. Nice and big. Drag that upwards. So one extra thing I'll show you here is that if you open up your properties for a thing like a slider and you click where it says no init and click it, it'll turn into init. That means like initialized. And that just means that like next time I open this patch, so say I close it and I make it again, so that's this one, you can see that the slider is actually where I left it, which is quite handy. So it might be a useful thing for you. So I'm going to make a bang. Make sure my audio input is on, and okay, cool. So that's working. Yeah, I haven't done any learning or anything like that like we did in the last video. But we can immediately set this up to start playing a sound, which is what we did in the very first version of these videos. So we'll just do open sounds musicbox.wave, because that's one of the files I have in there. And that will all go into read sf tilde. And as we were doing before, cool, so that works. Great. It's also triggering a little bit from my voice, but that's okay. So there's our really basic sound player. Now, turn up that velocity so it doesn't trigger constantly. So the first thing to look at is if you hook up a print object to the other outlet of bonk, you'll see every time that it's sending out a bang out the left outlet, it's also sending out some info out the right outlet. So there you can see it here, 0, 141.8, 5.32. The next one, 0, 349. Boy, that was loud. So they're sort of dancing roughly around 200, that second number. So the first number, the 0, is the identifier that for which sound it's hearing. So that's what we kind of covered in the last video. If I set up 4 or 5 things and taught this object 4 or 5 things to listen to, then those would be 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 or 5 or whatever. The second number there is what kind of they refer to as the velocity. It's essentially the volume, right? You can see the louder I clap, the higher that number. So the quieter ones were 137, 126, and the loud one there was 292. So that's cool. Now you'll notice that it's not going really that low. That's the lowest number I've made so far, 73. And that's because it's only printing anything that's above where I'm setting my minimum velocity. Okay, so that's the first thing to show. Now, instead of just printing it, which gets to be kind of unwieldy after a while, I'm going to unpack float, float. So that's just going to take those first two numbers in that list and unpack them for me. And I'll attach a number box here so we can see it. And now we'll just see a number that corresponds to the volume, more or less. Okay. Next, to make things easier for myself, I'm going to send whatever my minimum velocity is out a send object, which is just S. Now, because you'll probably end up referring to it a bunch. We'll certainly end up referring to it down here. Receive minimum velocity, minvel. And what we're going to do is subtract this number here that's coming in from that number, because what we really want is for the absolute quietest sound that you make to be 0, right? That you want that to be the quietest sound. So that means whatever you're setting your threshold to be should be the quietest. So that means you subtract whatever your volume is from your minimum velocity. That means if you make a sound that's quite close to your minimum velocity, it will be quite a low number. So once you've made this receive minvel and you've attached it to your minus object, you'll want to jiggle this around so that it makes sure it gets a value. Then we'll start seeing our... So you saw the first one there was only 3, and then it went up to 230 or something. So that's quite big. Now at this point, you can do a fancier calibration thing, but basically what I'd suggest is you just make some loud noises. Try to figure out what's the loudest you can make it. It looks like for me it's about 250 or so. And I would say then divide this number by whatever your rough maximum is. Maybe a little lower. Let's say 240. Because basically you want to get this to be somewhere between 0 and a little bit over 1. That's pretty good. So this is going to be our volume, right? Because every time we're making a noise, it's generating a number that corresponds to the volume of the input. And what all we want to do now is apply that to the volume of the output. And you do that with a multiplication tilde object. We used this before just to control our volumes generally. And what we'll do here is just send our output from the sound player into this multiplication object and attach this to there. Now every time we make a noise, this number here will be calculated, scaled down to be in a good volume control amount and applied to the sound. So you can hear it's much quieter there and much louder there. So a downside to this approach is that it will work much better the lower your minimum velocity is, but the lower your minimum velocity is, the noisier the data that comes in, so you'll hear it. It's actually working quite well there. Yeah, so when I set it really low, you start seeing that it starts to basically glitch out because it's getting too many false signals. So you would just have to kind of like figure out where in here is a good value for you that gives you a nice balance between volume range and false positives. You can also adjust this value here where I've got divided by 240 to give yourself a bit more of a range. There are a number of reasons why this is a pretty rough and tumble way of doing things. For one thing, what you'd really want to do is have some kind of volume curve, whereas this is a linear volume control, which isn't very good, but it's really quick and easy to throw together. And in terms of sound generation, you can chuck anything in here, and that would make it, it would work exactly the same way. So I hope that's helpful. Yeah, I'll upload this now. Enjoy.